is Doug DeMuro, and today we're going to talk about the used car market. Specifically, has it collapsed? Has it completely fallen off a cliff? People are asking me this all the time now. I run Cars and Bids. We do the podcast where we talk about the market. I pay very close attention to the car industry. So I'm the guy to ask about the car market. And a lot of people come up to me, and this is one of the very first things they ask: is it collapsing? Let's discuss. Today's video is brought to you by Cars and Bids, my online enthusiast car auction site that recently sold this, and this, and this, and this, and this. Okay, so let's talk about the used car market. I have, again, people reaching out constantly asking what's going on. I get interviewed in publications. People stop me in the airport. What is going on? They bought a car 2, 3, 4 years ago, and now they're seeing prices crater in their mind, and they're shocked and appalled, and they need to get to the bottom of this. Why have prices collapsed? And they're asking me. So let's get into it. We see this on Cars and Bids, frankly, all the time with people submitting cars for sale. They want to auction them on Cars and Bids. And they bought the car in 21 for a certain price, and the market is different now. It's 24, and they want to set a reserve, and we say, no, that reserve price isn't going to be selling this car. And they're shocked that that price is no longer the price. They're astonished by this. Or the other one is, they bought the car years ago, 2012, 2015, whatever, and they saw values climb like crazy, and now they want to sell. They're a little too late, and they don't get why it's not worth, what they, in their mind, thought it was worth at the peak. So the question then becomes, is the car market collapsing? Prices on all these cars are falling. Is the market collapsing? And the answer is no. This is normal. This whole exercise, the last few years, have really made me realize that people just are kind of disasters. I don't know if it's something with the brain, but they're kind of disasters when it comes to anything financial with any sort of memory required of the past. It used to be, you bought a car, you owned it for a while, you drove it, it depreciated, and then you sold it for less than you paid for it. That was the way it always went. Since I was a kid, that's how it was. It was simple. Well, for about 3 years there, so starting in mid 2020 and through like mid 23, that wasn't what was going on. What would happen is you could buy a car, you could drive it for a bit, and then you could sell it for more than you paid for it, or at least the same, but usually more in that period. And even though it was for hundreds of years one way, the way I described with the buying and the depreciating and the selling, even though that happened for hundreds of years, for the last 3 years, it was the other way with the buying and the selling for more. And so now that's not happening, and people think the market is collapsing. Folks, no, no. This is how it usually goes. This is normal. You buy a car, you drive it, it depreciates. That's the way it works. That's how it's done. This is not the sign of a collapsing car market. It's the sign of a healthy car market. In 21, used cars from many brands were worth more than new ones because there were no new ones. The market wasn't normal. Supply chains had problems getting new cars to market, and interest rates were tremendously low, which spurred people to go and buy the few cars that were available. And because of that lack of new car supply, used cars went higher. Demand went higher, prices went higher because there were no new cars pushing down on those used cars as a market force. Those things have changed. Interest rates are high again, so borrowing is less attractive. The supply chain is catching up greatly after COVID. New cars are coming back into stock, and used cars are becoming cheap again. Not just cheap again, like they used to be, like the way it used to work. Now, I know that this upsets people because I know there are people who bought cars in 22 on the idea that this would continue for a while. This again going back to the crazy financial memory problems that people have. But there were people who bought cars in 21, 22 and thought, I'm going to be able to ride this wave, drive this car for a couple of years, sell it for way more. I'm going to cash in. And this has really upset people that is not what's happening. But this is how it goes. And so when people ask me if the market is collapsing, no, that's not. We were in a bubble. And the bubble has popped. And thankfully for most consumers and human beings, it has popped somewhat slowly. So basically all of 23, kind of spring of 23, all throughout that year and all throughout 24, the bubble was sort of contracting. I wouldn't say it just instantly popped. And so that gave people who own a lot of cars an opportunity to prepare themselves. Hey, values are dropping. Hey, another month where values are down. Hey, if I want to sell it and get out of it, hey, we're seeing this slow market decline. It didn't just pop overnight, which is one of the reasons I'm so surprised that people are still asking this question. It was a slow decline. You had time to get out of that car if you were worried about it. But the bubble did eventually pop or deflate, and now it's time to return to normal. Now, of course, when people ask me this question, they are typically not asking about the general overall macroeconomic climate. They do not need an explanation of supply and demand. What they are usually asking me about, it's kind of a thinly veiled question about their specific car. And they frame it like it's a what's happening to the car market question. But really it's a question of, oh man, is the market collapsing? Because I need to get the money out of my 997. And what I want to say to this specific question is, again, no. This is not a market collapse. But also, come on! Is your memory this short term? This is what happens to cars. They depreciate. And I think, it was 3 years it was basically impossible to do wrong in the car world. And I think after that time, that 3 years of craziness where we couldn't set reserves high enough and cars were still selling, it's time for consumers, for people, for car owners to start wrapping their heads around the concept that things are getting cheaper again, that your car will depreciate, that your F80 M3 or your 997 or your Corvette, they are not worth as much as they were at the peak of the market. Your Land Cruiser is not as desirable as it was. Your Sprinter van is no longer going to be used by someone who got remote work access because that person's coming back into the office. Demand is lower and prices are lower. And in some cases, these cars are not depreciating. They're still flat and on a different plane than they were 3 years ago. So prices have gone up, maybe come down a little, but they're flat. And if that's true, if that's your car, consider yourself lucky, because some cars are now back in a normal, strong depreciation curve. Take, for example, early L405 Range Rovers. They came out in 2013, and they're now a $20,000 car. Throughout all of COVID, they stayed high, prices were strong, they were in the 30s. They're coming down. The 981 Porsche Boxster and Cayman that came out in 13, those are flirting with $20,000. Early 991 Porsche 911s that came out in 2012, those are getting into the 40s, which makes them pretty attractive. Shelby GT350s, the latest one, the flat plane crank, those are under 40 now. Hellcats are breaking into the $30,000 range. Like for my entire life, as a car enthusiast, my whole life, I would look at some cars when they were revealed and I would get all excited because I would think that's going to be cheap someday and it'll be awesome. And then there were a few years where nothing got cheaper and that didn't happen. And Cars and Bids was tremendously successful in this time. It was a great period to be in the car business. You were making a lot of money, you were selling everything, and it was fantastic. And as a guy who owned a bunch of cars at that time, it was also great. My cars were going up in value. Everything was wonderful. I was making all this money. But as a car enthusiast, as a degenerate car enthusiast who can't stop buying cars, it was also a disappointing time. It was balancing the success of Cars and Bids with the sadness of nothing is losing value. And as that car enthusiast, I gotta say, I'm kind of happy to see what we're going into here. As an enthusiast who likes to buy depreciated cars, it was a sad change from the norm that period, but now things are going in the other direction. So that's my response. No, the market isn't collapsing unless your definition of collapse is it's not increasing or staying as crazy high as it was back in 21. To me, it feels like it's basically back to normal. And I gotta tell you, I have a lot of money in cars and to this day. And so, like I mentioned, the financial side of me is disappointed that I'm not gonna keep getting a big rise. My Ford GT went up in value by probably $100,000, probably 50%. And so that's like disappointing to me, right? But the enthusiast in me, who's always just so pumped to see cars selling at the next tier and the next tier down, that enthusiast who's constantly checking cars and bids to see, oh, those are going for that now? I don't even buy cars like this all that much anymore, but it's more about like, I was that guy for years, coming out of college for 15 years. That's what I did. I would buy depreciated cars. And I'm still just such an enthusiast of seeing what stuff depreciates to. And so I love checking that stuff, and I love to see that it's going back to a normal depreciation curve, and we're back in that climate. Cars are depreciating again. So that's the situation. It's not a market collapse, but it is a softening market, a deflating bubble, and a return to a traditional depreciation curve. And I think it's time to understand that when you're submitting your cars to Cars and Bids and negotiating a reserve.